As we approach the final month before the 2024 presidential election, today we will be taking a look at the 2024 election map based on the newest polling averages in all 50 states. Before we get started, please subscribe to my channel for more election content and more election predictions, as well as real-time updates on major events related to the 2024 election. We will begin by taking a look at who is favored to win the election. Taking a look at 538 presidential election simulations, we see that Kamala Harris wins 56 times out of 100 compared to Donald Trump's 44. From this, we can see that Kamala Harris is slightly favored to win, but we really have to take a deeper dive into the polls to see how this election will play out. We will now be moving on to the national polls. Taking a look at the national polls, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 2.8%. This is a decent lead, but the question is this lead large enough to defeat Donald Trump? On the other hand, for Donald Trump, the question is this polling error small enough for him to be able to win key swing states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania? Let's find out as we take a deeper dive into all 50 states and how their newest polling averages predict them to vote. We will start by filling out the solid states for each candidate. These are states that are expected to vote for each candidate by over 15% in margin. For Kamala Harris, those states would be Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. For Donald Trump, his solid states would be Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana. With the solid states, Kamala Harris stands at 180 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 120 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the likely states for each candidate. These are states that are expected to vote for each candidate by 10 to 15% in margin. For Kamala Harris, she will likely win the states of New Hampshire, Maine's congressional districts, Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico. She will also likely win the state of Minnesota, as well as Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. In all of these states, she leads by around 10 to 15% in the polls, and she will likely win all of these states in the election. For Donald Trump, he will likely win the states of Alaska, Iowa, and Ohio. With the likely states, Kamala Harris stands at 226 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 148 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the lean states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by around 3 to 8% in margin, and overall, they are somewhat winnable by each party. Texas and Florida will be going to Donald Trump by a lean margin. Texas has been rapidly shifting to the left these last few elections, but it is not yet at a point where Democrats can realistically win the state. Florida, on the other hand, has been shifting to the right. In 2020, Biden lost Florida by 3.4%, which is an even larger margin than what Clinton lost to Trump by in 2016. For Kamala Harris, Michigan will go to her by a lean margin. Taking a look at the polling averages in Michigan, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 2.7%. Recently, Harris has been surging in Michigan, and she is likely to win the state. Some recent polls have Harris up by 6% in margin, which is huge in a swing state like Michigan. In 2020, Biden won Michigan by the biggest margin out of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and Harris as of now is looking pretty good to do so again. With the lean states, Kamala Harris stands at 241 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 219 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the final battleground states that will decide the 2024 presidential election. We will start by taking a look at the state of Georgia. Taking a look at the polling averages in the state of Georgia, we see that Donald Trump leads by 1.1%. Back in 2020, Biden had a historic flip in the state of Georgia, winning it by 0.2%. However, 4 years later, Harris is not as popular as Biden was 4 years ago. On the other hand, though, Trump is also not as popular as he was 4 years ago after January 6th and a lot of major scandals related to him. For Georgia, the ultimate deciding factor is turnout and how much voter suppression will play a role in affecting the turnout in Georgia. However, as of now, Donald Trump does lead by a very slight margin in the state of Georgia. Moving on to the state of North Carolina. As of recently, the Republican nominee for governor in North Carolina, Mark Robinson, has been involved in many major scandals regarding different comments he made on various websites across the internet. Now, Mark Robinson has been hand-endorsed by Trump many times throughout the years, and the two have campaigned and rallied together for both the presidential election and the gubernatorial election in North Carolina. Donald Trump has also praised Mark Robinson in many ways, calling him Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids, and even stating that he was a better version of Martin Luther King. After the releasement of the scandals, Mark Robinson's campaign is done, and he has dropped to almost below 20% in the polls compared to the Democratic nominee, Josh Stein. Because of his relationship with Mark Robinson, voters in North Carolina may also question Donald Trump, which will lead to a huge Harris boost in North Carolina. With all of these factors, I will be giving North Carolina to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin. Moving on to the state of Nevada. Taking a look at the polling averages in Nevada, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 0.7%. In the past few elections, Nevada has voted pretty consistently, going to the Democrats by 2.4% in both 2016 and in 2020. As of now, Kamala Harris does hold a slight lead of 0.7%, and her lead is also expected to increase following a national Kamala Harris surge. Because of that, I will be giving Nevada to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin. Let's take a look at the state of Arizona. Taking a look at the polling averages in Arizona, we see that Donald Trump leads by 0.8%. In 2020, similar to Georgia, Arizona went blue for the first time in many elections. Biden carried the state by 0.2%, leading to his 306 electoral vote victory over Trump. 4 years later, Harris is not as popular as Biden was 4 years ago, but when you take a look at the demographics, you see that Harris is performing worse amongst Hispanic and black voters than Biden was 4 years ago, but she's actually performing better amongst white voters than Biden was 4 years ago, which is why a lot of these Sun Belt states have been shifting to the right compared to Biden in 2020, while the Rust Belt has actually been shifting to the left. Nevertheless, Arizona is still very competitive, but as of now, Donald Trump does lead by a slight margin in the newest polling averages. And with Arizona, Kamala Harris stands at 263 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 246 electoral votes as we move on to the final two states of the 2024 election. We will start with the state of Wisconsin. Taking a look at the polling averages in Wisconsin, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 2.3%. This by itself is a decent lead, which is also expected to grow due to many other factors. Taking a look at the demographics like we talked about earlier, the Rust Belt is primarily made up of white voters, unlike the Sun Belt where Hispanic and black voters make up a big portion. And like we talked about earlier, Kamala Harris is performing better amongst white voters than she is black and Hispanic, which contributes to her lead in Wisconsin. Because of these underlying factors, I will be giving Wisconsin to Kamala Harris, which also pushes her over the 270 electoral count majority needed to become the next president of the United States of America. And moving on to our final state, the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, which is also the most important state in the 2024 election. Taking a look at the polling averages in Pennsylvania, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1.3%. Pennsylvania, yet again, is another Rust Belt state where the demographics do favor Kamala Harris. One of the biggest issues in Pennsylvania is fracking, in which Donald Trump attacked Kamala Harris's change of opinion on the issue throughout the years. However, during the presidential debate, Harris made herself clear that she would not ban fracking if elected president, and furthermore, she also had a great debate performance against Donald Trump, in which she made many sloppy remarks that will give Harris a boost in Pennsylvania. As of now, the polls do give Harris a decent lead in Pennsylvania, but due to many other factors, I will be giving Pennsylvania to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin, making the final electoral count 292 electoral votes for Kamala Harris to 246 electoral votes for Donald Trump. If you made it here, please subscribe to my channel for more election content and more election predictions leading up to the 2024 election. Thank you for watching.